Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dax Moreno. I'm the host for today's session. We are incredibly excited to have San Antonio's own Julián Castro join us today for a conversation. And for those of you who have been possibly living underneath a rock or do not read anything in newspapers or any kind of press, Julián is our former city councilman. He's a former mayor of San Antonio. He's also the former Secretary of Housing and Urban Development under the Obama administration. And more recently, he was a candidate for the 2020 presidential election. And as of last week, the host of his very own podcast, Our America. So
That's
Julián,
right.
Thank you so much for joining us. I know you've got a packed schedule, but how has life been right now over the last few weeks, launching the podcast, just kind of getting everything done? I'm sure everyone's really curious to hear what you've been up to.
Yeah, no, hey, Dex, thank you so much for having me, for the invitation to be here with you today. I hope everybody's staying healthy and doing well. I'm here in San Antonio with my family. I don't think I've taken a flight since March 13th, like a lot of folks. The silver lining of this coronavirus time period, just family-wise, has been getting to spend a lot more time with my family, because in 2019, I was gone probably 70 or 75% of the time to Iowa or New Hampshire or wherever we were campaigning. That part of it has been nice. And I'm also excited about some of the things I got going on. The podcast that you mentioned, Our America, which focuses on a lot of the stories that I heard over the years at HUD and on the campaign trail, like the real life struggles that people go through in this country, whether it's job loss or on housing. This week we're covering what happened in Flint and this hopeful story of people that have stepped up and provided clean water to the community. So we're trying to kind of take a hopeful, optimistic look and also explore solutions for some of the challenges that we face. I'm also helping a lot of candidates that are running for office. We're only 7 weeks away from the election, and so that's taking up a good amount of time. As you know, everybody's on Zoom after Zoom after Zoom. And then on top of that, I have an 11-year-old daughter and a 5-year-old son who are here during the day with me, and I'm managing their virtual learning, especially the 5-year-old. So I think a lot of parents can relate to that these days. It's like a whole crazy new world of staying on top of that.
Yeah, from jets and planes to Zoom and probably Google Classroom, right? That's a good shift. That's a good shift. You mentioned something there, and thank you again for joining us for this San Antonio Startup Week session. One of the main things that we wanted to talk about this year, you touched on a little bit, which was that aspect of hope. So many people are talking about the crossroads that not only we're at as a nation, but really more close to home in our community in San Antonio. We're bringing Startup Week together around some concepts of reconnection, rebuilding, reviving, and rebooting this startup and entrepreneur ecosystem that I'm really excited to talk to you a little bit about today, because I'm sure maybe you may not own it all the way, but in many, many ways, you are the godfather. You are the first domino that fell that actually kicked off all this activation of people and businesses and organizations that have turned downtown San Antonio and our entrepreneur system really on its ear. So we're here to talk about the decade of downtown. I listened to that first episode of your podcast with your brother. I know you've got some stories, so I'm hoping we can visit and revisit some of those stories from the very beginning of the decade of downtown.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm proud of the efforts of so many people, and it's nice to reflect on it a decade later.
Yeah, and that was really the thing. We wanted to kind of rewind and take a look back, because some folks do interviews and some other things, and we've kind of looked at it with this broader lens, but never really specifically from the lens of startups and entrepreneurs. So I'm curious, what was the real genesis? What were the first seeds planted in your vision for the decade of downtown? Where did that all begin?
Well, for me, it was really part and parcel of my vision for trying to ensure that opportunities were available to people here that I saw when I went away to college and to Stanford in the Bay Area were available to people in the Bay Area. And, when I went away from home at 18, it was the first time that I'd ever really been away from home, and I could kind of compare that Bay Area to my hometown. I saw a lot of things that I liked in San Antonio, the kind of community that it is. I also saw things that we could improve on, and one of those was creating this ecosystem of opportunity that included tech in all of its different forms and industries. And so from the very first time that I ran for office in 2001, I think I ran on something I called a smart growth knowledge economy agenda. And the decade of downtown was part of the expression of that. More broadly, it was a recognition that we needed to do something to turn around the fact that for too long, growth had just been going out to the suburbs. And that if we weren't careful in San Antonio, we would get hollowed out. And that had been happening to downtown over the decades, right? People knew it for the Riverwalk. Every now and then folks would go, have a meal somewhere downtown, but a lot of the employee base had been drained, especially in 2008 when AT&T announced that its headquarters was moving to Dallas. That was a big blow right before I became mayor in 2009. So there were these different factors that came together that were consistent with a vision that I had for investing in the urban core of the city.
And, I had a personal response to that. We were at Rackspace in the early 2000s when it was downtown. And you were right. There was some signs of life, but not really a lot of big push and support. And that AT&T announcement and structure really kind of shook some of those foundations. And it's from that, right? Like AT&T, the executive and some of the technology work that they were doing at that point. When you started building this idea and then you announced this is going to be the decade of downtown, were you expecting such a strong and passionate response and kind of pillars of support that rose up from our community? Folks like Graham Weston and others that stepped up and said, we like this, let's work together, let's build it. What was that like?
I thought the time was ripe, that there would be some support, but I couldn't have anticipated the way that some people would go above and beyond, especially Graham Weston, a number of other folks that embraced this idea of revitalizing the urban core and infusing it with the kind of energy and amenities and opportunities that you want in a downtown. And so it was wonderful to see the response that we got, not only when we announced it, but of course in the years after that. And most importantly, the hard work that people set themselves to of investing in the urban core and making a commitment to create the kind of downtown that we knew that we could have.
So when you were building out that vision and sharing it, I'm not sure if this kind of translates all the way up in leadership levels to where you were at that point, but I think everyone can relate to, you have a really, really great idea and it becomes this nice vision. And then you kind of have to slowly whittle away some pieces maybe that you really love or you become attached to. Were there any pieces of that decade of downtown vision that you really wished would have been able to be included, but maybe the timing wasn't right or we didn't have the right resources or capacities to do?
Yeah, I mean, to be frank, I think part of the unfinished business of it is to make sure that it's a downtown with opportunity for everyone. And so we did make a push to include, for instance, affordable housing units, whether it was at Hemisphere or another number of other places. But I believe that part of what we need to do in the future is to ensure that even more so, there's more opportunity for folks of all different economic backgrounds to participate. And so that's one of my hopes. The other thing is, look, the needs of downtown, like the needs of so many different neighborhoods across the city, are the need outstrips the resources that we have. And so there are many different infrastructure projects that would be wonderful to do. Another example is the creation of rail, which I think made sense, that was not, no pun intended, on track for a while and then got off track. I think maybe in the future, I don't know when that will be, but at some point in the future, San Antonio is going to have to grapple with how you do a better mass transit system that will likely include rail. And at that point, when that happens, I think the downtown will be a major part of that, just like certain corridors in our city. So those are two pieces, the affordability that we need to continue to press on, and then also better transit through downtown.
That makes so much sense. And it's still things that pop up. And what's really wonderful about this opportunity we're having with our startup week or startup month is we really want to reflect on all of the wonderful gains that we've made, but also the opportunities that we've kind of left unchallenged. And I think what you just talked about there is going to be the source of a lot of conversations happening throughout the month of October. So I'm really glad that our audience is going to hear you say that and then see this directly connected to conversations that are going to be happening a little bit later in our programming cycle. I'd love to fast forward a little bit. So we had the decade of downtown, you had the vision, you brought people together, and you really helped develop the momentum. Then opportunity on a much larger scale came in and said, hey, we need your help. President Obama knocking on the door. That's one I think everybody wants to answer. And I've always been really curious, and as I've talked to people about this, I'd love to know how your vision, or maybe how your reflection of San Antonio shifted or modified or changed as you started working with more communities from different backgrounds, industries, and growth cycles. How did San Antonio and that vision in the decade of downtown, how did that start looking as you started getting a little bit broader perspective and global approach to things?
Well, I mean, in some ways it was, I was heartened because what I saw in San Antonio was this sort of esprit de corps, willingness to work together as a community to reinvest in the urban core of the city. What I saw in many communities, not all communities, but a lot of it was people are fighting, and people can't get on the same page. And we have enough of a challenge of not being able to get on the same page in DC, right? But usually cities are where people can roll their sleeves up and get things done across party lines, and because they're part of the same community. And I think largely that you've had that in San Antonio compared to other places. But again, what it also showed me was, hey, look, if we're not careful, this decade of downtown, as I said here when I was HUD secretary, could give way to a decade of displacement. If you think about what's happened in Austin, for instance, in East Austin with the African-American community there, you think about places like Seattle, or long ago, San Francisco. So it gave me a sense of, I think the vision is a good vision, it's a right vision, but also you need to always make sure at every step that it's in practice inclusive. And so, one of the things that I did was say that we need to put our foot on the gas in terms of creating affordable housing opportunity and ensure that it was a decade of downtown for everybody.
And that's a quote that's been shared quite a bit. I think Diego Bernal has done that. And I accidentally attributed it to him when he said, no, that was Julián's quote, which is, we need to make opportunity available for everybody. So just know that's being defended. And it's still one of those main principles. I think a lot of people you've imbued us with as one of those tools of thought and kind of vision and planning as we look to move forward. I'm curious, as you did this movement and as you started looking at more cities and getting into more of these situations like Flint, Michigan and others, in San Antonio, we are in the process, I think, of really finding out what really makes us special. What is our bright, shining light that comes out before we even enter into the room? And I know a lot of people have different opinions that they're thinking of in their head right now that I said it, but to you, as you went out to other communities and met with other leaders, what was it about San Antonio that kept holding true and was unique versus other cities maybe?
I think that the charm of the place, of the people, that people come here and there's a certain feel to the community. People feel welcome. They feel like this is a place where folks know each other, that there's a greater sense of community here, even though the city has gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. That's one calling card. Another calling card is culturally. One of the other things, because you asked what did I see, one of the other things that I realized when I visited like 100 different cities during my time at HUD, was that I think we don't appreciate enough the imprint of the Mexican American culture here, like that, how much that can be an advantage, because really that there are very few other big cities that actually have that. And I saw over the years that in some ways we were trying to kind of taking it for granted and sort of, oh, okay, yeah, that's there, but then moving past that. And one of the realizations I really had when I saw more and more out there was that we actually need to embrace it more, and that can help us set ourselves apart, you know, and all, obviously you're going to be a community that it's more and more diverse, and people of different backgrounds working together and shine a spotlight on culture throughout. But we have something really special here, right? Our history and legacy. And from what we do with historic preservation to how we fund arts agencies, to how we sell the city, I think that we need to smartly, highlight that better and cultivate it and preserve it. And then just the cost of living here. I mean, you compare the cost of living here still, even though, you know, it's been going up, compare the cost of living here to living in one of these California cities or one of these East Coast cities, or even Chicago and these Midwestern cities, and there's no comparison. So that also is a real draw to a lot of people.
That's fantastic. I could not agree more with the authentic imprint of Mexican culture and heritage that we have. And I think that's something everyone feels. And with even the announcement over the last couple of years of how Dia de los Muertos has become kind of that next phase of things for us to embrace and further educate our community on, it's really exciting, I think, to be in this time of shifting into this new identity and embracing it, right, fully, of who we are, and welcoming more people that want to get into that. I'd love to ask a question here before we shift on to some future state questions. You touched on it a little bit, but were there any unexpected or surprising results from the decade of downtown that, as you were doing your traveling as HUD, and even in the last years, and when you declared as a candidacy for president, was there anything that you just went, wow, I did not expect that to happen, or I can't believe this is actually formed and taken off in that unique way? Anything that stands out specifically to you?
Well, I mean, one of the things that was a pleasant surprise was how, like, each of the building blocks got put into place, whether it was the work that Graham did to make a commitment to invest in housing downtown, to the work on Hemisphere. Like, in a fairly short amount of time, a lot has come together. Before I left for DC, and then accelerated a lot. I also, am happy that there's this greater ecosystem that includes Tech Block and a number of other groups. One of the things we always wanted to do was provide opportunities for a lot of young people who were getting their education, but then they would look around in San Antonio and say, where's the opportunity here? Both the economic opportunity, the cultural opportunity, that more of that is being put in place.
That's awesome. And I think a lot of people would agree. As we turned a corner, it felt like, I think in 2015, 2016, walking up and down the Houston Street corridor, you just saw the difference, just the energy, the activity, the different kinds of businesses that were starting to come and be drawn into downtown proactively and organically, really shifted a lot of that. And it wouldn't have happened, to your point, without those pillars, without geekdom and that investment in some of the housing that Graham did. The Hemisphere is a huge draw. And it just brought everything together. Southtown and the Pearl and Midtown, it just really brought everything together in this wonderful package. I'd love to shift gears. And, before, we kind of sign off here, I'd love to ask some questions about the future of San Antonio. You were obviously the architect of this very transformational vision for our city, and specifically, and again, to our tech community and our entrepreneurs. I would love to know where you think the next horizon is for San Antonio. We've touched on opportunities around affordable housing and the transit, but specifically around tech investment and tech education. There's some workforce development planning going on, but what is that next horizon for San Antonio? What does that look like? Is it someone we're striving to be, or maybe it's a new vision, or possibly even, just staying the course, but doing it in an accelerated way?
Well, it's maximizing the connections between the potential of our workforce and the opportunities that exist. One opportunity that we're going to have is passing the 8th of a cent sales tax in November that the mayor is putting on the ballot. And my hope is that some of those resources are going to go to the very types of work, the very types of jobs that we're speaking about, today. Our community college system has a vital role to play in helping to create that knowledge base. Geekdom, a number of other organizations that are doing great work. What I see is, how do we continue to strengthen those efforts? And what I found over the years, it really, there's no magic, right? There's hardly a Tesla that invests in Reno, or soon it's going to invest just outside of Austin, or maybe right in Austin. But Austin already has a lot of momentum. It's usually, you don't get one of these earthquake events. It's that it builds. Yeah, there's some seminal investments, but I think we have enough of that here where you can build on that. And at the same time, it's about making sure all of the cultural amenities are there and the quality of life, so that people will actually keep their business in San Antonio, grow their business in San Antonio, or launch their business in San Antonio, grow their business here, become part of the community, help provide more job opportunity. That's been the story of successful cities, generation after generation, in whatever the leading edge or the cutting edge was of technology back then, right? And San Antonio, because of the kind of community that we are, if we get those things right, if we invest in the quality of life, cultural opportunity, and especially in the knowledge base, then I think that we'll get there. And that each year it'll accelerate more and more.
It's that concept almost of like overnight success. It's never overnight. It's that hole below the surface. We've been doing this for years and practicing and developing. But it's hitting the pitch at just the right moment and knowing when we can kind of seize the opportunity and really push. I love that. I think that's going to resonate with a lot of folks that are going to be listening and joining us today and hearing that message from you, because I think there are a lot of folks who feel like we're doing the right things. We're getting there. We're seeing some of the movement and momentum, but now it's really about, well, what comes next? And I think a lot of it is like what you said, it's staying the course, but knowing where to push and when to push and really, grasp the opportunity. The last thing I'd really love to do, and then I know we have a time limit here. I'd love to know more about Our America, the podcast. Really excited to see that announcement. The first episode dropped last week. You had the second one actually just come out, I think today. So I'd love to hear a little bit more. Where did that idea come from? Tell me about the podcast.
Well, look, I have to confess that when I went away to college, originally I thought for a time that I was going to go into journalism. My brother Joaquin and we majored in communication at Stanford, and at one point I wanted to go into broadcast journalism. This is about as close as I'm ever going to get. But what I wanted to do with my time, part of what I'm doing with my time, is really trying to highlight the stories of people in our country who both are struggling, but also are inspirations, right? Because I think we have to find hope right now for how do we provide more opportunity in this country? How do we close the gap in opportunity? How do we achieve racial equality in America? All of these things that we're grappling with right now. And so this episode on Flint, for instance, is about two folks who, a pastor and his wife, who have provided clean water to the Flint community for 6 years since the Flint water crisis started.
Wow.
They took it upon themselves to do partnerships and come up with something they call a clean water box that does filtration, but at a larger scale, and provide that to Flint residents a couple of times a week. They're still at it. We're going to find those kind of hopeful stories. And I believe that we can help in our own way start a conversation, not just about the differences that we have, but solutions that are out there to address some of these challenges that we have.
Yeah, and never more so than solving them in your community first. I think that's been a big push where a lot of people, when we start thinking about some of these issues, at least in our community, we know it starts in our backyard. It starts with us figuring it out first amongst each other, putting aside some of those things and figuring out how do we collectively rise up and figure something out. My last question, and then we're going to say goodbye here because I know you have another meeting here. Any last comments or thoughts or words to share with folks from our community, the entrepreneurship kind of tech community, about what's going on, what to get excited for, or maybe what they should be thinking about as they look to press forward?
Oh, I mean, first, in so many ways, I'm proud of the strides that are being made right now. And the tech community is so much a part of that. We're excited about the great ideas that are coming out of startups and San Antonio companies, and just excited about the potential for them, what it's going to mean for these entrepreneurs and what it's going to mean for the community. I would love nothing more than if we were sitting here 10 years from now to see so many of them have grown and be providing more job opportunity to people in the San Antonio community. So I would say that you have a tremendous role to play in the well-being of our community. And I hope that you'll fill that role in every way. I mean, you're doing that, making a difference with your entrepreneurialism. I know, as a former small business owner myself, I hold my own little law office once, that sometimes you feel you're drowning just to keep up with your business. And I completely get that. I guess my challenge would be to those who are able, to continue, because I know a lot already are, to be as involved as you can in the community in whatever way it is, whether it's the issue of literacy or, other civic engagement, or addressing affordability or racial equality in any way that you can. I hope that you'll be fully a part of making our community a place where everybody can thrive and prosper. Because the closer that we get to that, I think the more successful everyone is going to be.
Well said. Well said. Secretary Castro, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate you joining us for San Antonio Startup Week kickoff here. And, we're looking forward to more episodes of the podcast. So keep them coming.
Thanks a lot, Dax. It's good to be with you.
Thanks.